Summit grads, it's David Stubblefield, and I'm excited about this next Porch Talk. Our special guest today is Robert Nicholson. Robert is the president and executive director of the Philos Project, and he's also a board member and co-founder of Passages Israel, which is a fascinating organization that we're working with now to try to partner with to get trips for our Summit graduates to Israel to learn more about the biblical roots of the Christian faith in the land of Israel and the Jewish tradition, but also understand better what's going on there today with the Middle Eastern conflict. He also holds a BA in Hebrew Studies from Binghamton University and a JD and MA in Middle Eastern History from Syracuse University. He's a former U.S. Marine, and he started the Philos Project in 2014 to stimulate a new generation of religious and cultural exchange between the Near East and the West. His written work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Telegraph, New York Post, Jerusalem Post, Newsweek's Providence, First Things, The Hill, and National Interest. So please join us in this conversation. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us in our Summit community and for being available to tell us a little bit about what's going on in the Middle East. Before we get started with that, though, I'd love to have a brief introduction on yourself, your background. Who is Robert Nicholson, and how did you come to be a follower of Jesus?
Well, I have a little bit of an unusual story. I came to follow Jesus, ironically, as a result of some meetings I was having in a synagogue.
Wow.
I grew up, my mother is Christian and was very, very serious about it. I was not and wanted nothing to do with it from a young age. I thought it was kind of a dumb person's religion, and I was going to discover the truth of the cosmos on my own. And I did some of that for, good 10, 12 years. Didn't find a whole lot that was satisfying. After the September 11th terrorist attacks, the whole world was in a strange mood. Religion, which I thought was pretty much on its way out, came back with a vengeance, and I became intrigued by it, intellectually, not spiritually. And wanted to find out, what are all these crazy people talking about, the Muslims and the Christians and Osama bin Laden and George Bush. And so I literally got a Bible and got a Quran and read them. And I wanted to go deeper. I was convinced that the translators were probably lying in, trying to trick me in the way that they translated. So I wanted to learn the languages. I tried to learn Arabic, couldn't find a tutor. Went to a local synagogue, got a tutor, very nice gentleman, older gentleman, who agreed to teach this non-Jew in his synagogue twice a week how to read and speak Hebrew. And that was really the beginning for me. And I realized, wow, Christianity comes from this much longer tradition that goes all the way back to the region where all of this crazy stuff is happening. And that was, very different than I had thought about Christianity before. I thought of it as something my mom was into. It's American, it's European, but I realized there's this whole world, and just got sucked down in it. It pulled me not only to Christianity eventually. It took a while, it took like 2 years, but became a believer. And then it also exposed me to this other part of the world, the Near East, the Middle East. Like, what is all this stuff, right? And that's really what ended up, leading to me where I am today.
Wow, that's awesome. So what is it you're doing today? What is the Philos Project?
So the Philos Project is a nonprofit. It's an educational and advocacy organization based in New York City, started in 2014. The mission is to promote positive Christian engagement in the Near East. And essentially what we do is we educate Christians from different Christian traditions, different backgrounds, professional backgrounds, racial, ethnic backgrounds, on their common heritage in Jerusalem, right? The Hebraic worldview, something we talk a lot about. You say it's synonymous with biblical worldview, but really giving it that Hebrew and kind of Near Eastern dimension. And then try to bring those people together in a network to do tangible things for the people who live there today. So we do a lot on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We do a lot for the dwindling, persecuted Christian communities in the region. Think about the Copts or, the Assyrians, the Armenians, some of these groups. And we do it through trips, educational programs. We do a lot of content, a lot of media, coalition building. Philos is kind of a big, sprawling organization, but I would say, and I'll just do a shameless plug here.
No, please do.
The kinds of people that come through Summit are the kinds of people we would love to have in the Philos network. We have some really interesting young leadership programs. Our partner organization, Passages, does college student programs that bring people on trips to Israel, and we do some other trips to the wider region. So anybody who's interested, philosproject.org. We have free audio courses. I have a podcast, The Deep Map. There's a whole world that you could discover at Philos if these are the kinds of things that are interesting for you.
Can you give us then just a brief history of the conflict in the Middle East, maybe highlighting the important things for someone to know, an American Christian to know, to start to wrap their mind around and give them context for understanding what's happening right now?
Yeah. Well, I'll go way back and then bring it up, way recently. So way back, we know Abraham was called out of Ur of the Chaldees to the Promised Land. He got there. He was the only, what we might call Jew, not necessarily a Jew, but a proto-Jew.
Yeah.
And he was surrounded by Canaanites. And from Abraham, because of the promises that God made, the revelations that he gave to Abraham and his descendants, the people of Israel were established. At first, they were a small group on the hilltops. Eventually, they became a kingdom, and then two kingdoms. They were exiled not once but twice, came back from Babylon, reestablished their temple, and for a while were independent again before the Greeks and then the Romans took over. In the year 70, the Romans crushed a Jewish rebellion. This was only 40 years after our Lord resurrected. And then in 135, crushed a second rebellion, and this time exiled the Jews out, renamed the city Aelia Capitolina, Jerusalem, in honor of a pagan god, and renamed Judea Palestina. And the word Palestine originally comes from a word that we Bible readers know very well, which is Philistine. And the Romans renamed the whole area out of spite for not the Jews, but the Jews' enemies, the Philistines. And that word sort of stuck. It was adopted not only in Greek and Latin, but also in Arabic. And for a long time, that region was considered Palestine. But people often think Palestine was like a country or a state. There was like a kingdom of Palestine. There was never any such thing to this day. The Palestine was the equivalent of, you could think of it as on par with like New England or the Pacific Northwest. It was like a region, right?
Yeah.
And the people who lived in that region were way back mostly Jews, and then after Christianity in the centuries that followed, they became mostly Christian with some sort of Jewish minorities, especially after the exile. And then the Muslims came. The Muslims came in the sort of like the middle of the 7th century. They took over and basically ruled that area with the one interruption of the European Crusades from then until 1917. 1917, this area, which had been ruled by the Ottoman Turks, right? There was an Ottoman Caliphate, a Muslim state that controlled what we think of as Palestine, as well as other areas, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. They controlled it for several hundred years, about 400 years. And they entered World War I on, unfortunately for them, the losing side, and they lost. And the British, the French, the Americans, the Italians were the winners. And after that war, World War I, basically the Middle East, as we think of it, got carved up between the winners. The British got Palestine, as well as some other parts. And they made a big decision that has affected everything ever since. This is 1917. What the British did was formally, as a matter of policy, declare their support for this thing called Zionism, and promised that they would do whatever they could as the British government to without prejudicing the rights of other people who live there, Arabs primarily, were going to help the Zionists do what it is that they wanted to do. And I'll say a word about Zionism. So this word Zionism, it's one of the scariest words in the English language, right?
Right,
People say Zionist. It's like, Zionist sounds like an alien invader, right? From something
It starts
foreign.
with a Z. It reminds you of
Yeah,
like zealots or something, like, whoa.
Yeah. I do think it actually, because it starts with a Z, that's actually a big thing. So what is Zionism? So if you hear its opponents talk about Zionism, Zionism is like, the desire on the part of the Jews and the West to colonize the Arab world or the Islamic world, right? It's an attempt to import empire to, on top of the heads of the indigenous people.
Yeah.
What is Zionism really? I mean, Zionism is actually a very simple thing. It is a movement that started in the late 19th century that was all about Jewish self-determination in the Jewish homeland, right? Jewish homeland being Eretz Yisrael in Hebrew, or the land of Israel. Mm-hmm. And that movement started very small, very, very small in Europe, mainly in Central and Eastern Europe, among a small group of Jews, secular Jews, interestingly. Most Jews for most of history have been religious of one kind or another. This thing called Zionism started primarily among secular Jews, people who were less, going to the synagogue and stuff like that. And why did it come about? It came about because of, this is hard to say as a Christian, and you could say post-Christian persecution in Europe, right? Christians have been horrible to Jews. A lot of us would be, oh no, not Christians. Those are the other Christians, not the good one. Whatever. From a Jewish perspective, they're Christian, right? They have crosses. They talk about Jesus, so they're Christian.
Well, there's been some pretty well-known Christians, like reformers even, that had a very anti-Semitic bias.
Martin Luther did a lot of great stuff. He did at least one thing really badly. He became very anti-Semitic. And that he's not the only one. Lots of people.
Yeah.
So these people came to this conclusion. They were way ahead of their time. I'm talking now about like late 1870s, early 1880s. They said to themselves, these Christians are never going to accept us. It used to be they were mad at us because we killed Jesus. Now they're saying something totally different on racial terms, like scientific terms. We don't belong in their societies. Whatever it's going to, even if it's not that, it's going to be something else. So we need to get out of here. Like, they do not want us. And there were a couple of things that happened in the 19th century that just drove that point home. And so they started to move. I mean, like young people pack up their bags and move to the Ottoman Empire, right? To a whole different context, from Germany, from, modern, the Russian Empire, to this area called Palestine. And what did they do when they got there? Did they, take up the sword and drive out the inhabitants? No, they just bought property. They'd settle in little properties. And slowly, over 40 years before the British came, they had built up like a pretty serious population. So that when the British came and said, now we're in charge and we support this whole movement, the Jews were ecstatic, right? And it was just in time, because it was at that moment that anti-Semitism began to rear its ugly head in Europe. I'll stop here if you want to drill down on anything. There is then, of course, the beginning of the conflict, and that's like another phase of this story.
Yeah. So at this point in time, when they started moving back, who was inhabiting Palestine?
So there were several 100,000 people living there. Now, Palestine, as we know from contemporary accounts, both 19th century and before, was always considered a backwater, right? No Arab state had ever made Jerusalem. There have been multiple Arab and Muslim states over the centuries. None of them had ever made Jerusalem its capital. None of them. Damascus, Baghdad, Cairo, a number of Muslim states have been established. None of them thought Jerusalem was important enough to make a capital. Most of the people living there, however, at that point spoke Arabic. Now, a lot of the categories that you and I use today are incomprehensible back then. Of course, there was not yet an Israel, so people were not saying, I'm Israeli.
Right.
But neither were people saying they were Palestinian.
Right.
It was just not the way people talk. People primarily, honestly, even today, in that part of the world, identify themselves primarily by way of religion. I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew. Now, I'd say even furthermore, the idea of being an Arab, of course, people spoke Arabic in some sense.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm part of that. That was really not a category that people used, right? So there's so much to say on that front. I'll try to make it simple. What happened was there was a movement of what's called Arab nationalism. Now, you guys are interested in worldview.
Yeah.
For most of history, most of Islamic history, the primary, like the core idea, the core concept, the pillar of a Muslim society was the religion. It was Islam, right? And if you were Muslim, fine. Didn't matter what color you were, where you were from. Muslim, you're in. If you're not Muslim, then you're second class. What happened with this thing called Arab nationalism was a change in the worldview. And it's not surprising that this worldview was actually promoted by Arab Christians. And what did they do? They said, we are going to shift the terms of our society, our citizenship, from religion to ethnicity or race, right? Instead of being Muslim, Christian, Jewish, we're just going to be Arab. And how do you become an Arab? You speak Arabic. And this was the kind of a gospel that was being preached, very revolutionary at the time, mostly not what the people wanted, but it became, by virtue of the European victory, embedded within these new states that get carved up. Suddenly we have Syria, we have Iraq, we have Lebanon, Saudi Arabia was before that, it was the kingdom of the Hijaz, then it became Saudi Arabia. These things did not exist before World War I. And another one of those things was Palestine, the mandate for Palestine. And we all know, well, I think probably most of us know, the map, or at least the silhouette of the map, kind of like an arrowhead-shaped thing that we think of as Israel, or people would say as Palestine. That map literally has never existed in any book, any chart, as long as history's ever existed, right? That's not a map of anything before 1917. After that, it became the basis for this thing called the British Mandate for Palestine. The British basically got to babysit this country after World War I until the local people could build their own government. And to be a Palestinian was to be a person living in that area, whether you were Arab or Jewish. What's interesting, that there's a newspaper, you could find it online, the Palestine Post, and they talk about Palestinian this, Palestinian that. When they and everybody else at that time were using the word Palestinian, it meant Jewish as much as it meant Arab.
Wow. Yeah, we would have no category for that today.
Not at all.
Yeah. So when did that start to change? I mean, this kind of the 1946 or afterwards is when it really started to light up. But
so what the Arabs wanted, to the extent there was a unified Arab voice, after World War I was one unified Arab kingdom,
right,
that would replace the Turkish rule that had been, put upon them for so long. And that's a whole story as to how the British and French lived up or didn't live up to the promises that they made to Arabs.
Yeah.
But needless to say, they didn't get exactly what they wanted. At best, they got several Arab states that were carved out of this larger land. And of course, they got this thing carved out that was now dedicated to Zionism, to the Jews, right? The beginnings of what seemed like a Jewish state. And for the Arabs living in the British Mandate for Palestine, the idea that the Jews were going to be ruling, if not now, soon, over this thing, over what they considered was their homeland, right? They have the records to show. My grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, we're from here. That became intolerable, and starting as early as 1920, they began to rise up. And it wasn't everybody, but there were certainly of the leadership, there was a real move to stop British support for Zionism. 1920, 1921, a big uprising in 1929 that murdered a bunch of innocent, civilian Jews.
Yeah.
And then again in the 1930s. And over the course of the British Mandate, which went from 1917 to 1948, you see increasing Arab dissatisfaction and a growing support for that anti-Zionist or what would become anti-Israel sentiment among the other Arab states, right? Arab states are notoriously at odds with each other. They don't disagree. They don't agree on much. One of the things that Palestine has provided then and now for the Arab and even the greater Islamic world is some common purpose, a common sense of identity, right? What links an Arab from Algeria and a Muslim, Pashtun from Pakistan. Like nothing, right? And language, no. I mean, religion. But what Palestine does is it links those people and provides a shared enemy, right? One other thing I'll say about that is that what Palestine represents in the Islamic or Arab mind is not what it represents for you and I, right? When I think about Israel, I think about a people that was, unjustly exiled, getting to come back after many centuries of persecution to their homeland and, setting up a little tiny state that really doesn't want to bother anybody. That's not how it's seen in the Arab and Islamic world. It's actually kind of surprising for us on the outside. The Jews of Israel, which to you and I are linked to the Jews of the Bible, right? There's this connection, are for them not actually Jews. There's a belief in this world that these are like imposter Jews. They're not really Jews. They're like used by the colonial imperial powers of the West, masquerading under the pretense of resettling their homeland to, in fact, drive a wedge right through the middle of the Islamic world to colonize territory that never, ever belonged to them. There probably wasn't even a Jewish temple, this group says, and being perpetuated by the imperial West, right? They see it as basically like a giant aircraft carrier in the middle of the Islamic world. So for all of these people, the interest becomes, okay, fine, justice for the Palestinians, but it's actually much more about dislodging the West from the center of their world, liberating the land, whether it's for the Arab nation or for Allah, depends on who you ask, so that the Arab and Muslim peoples can kind of regain their sense of self, regain their lost kingdom, right, and get back into history in the way that they deserve to, right? A very different way of thinking about this land than you and I have.
So is that the link then between the mutual hatred for the U.S. and the West and Jews? Because I've always kind of wondered, like, why is there this initial? It's like an easy slide from Jews and America, Jews and the U.S.
Right.
And like, well, why?
It is.
Why is that? I mean,
so there's two ways to look at it, two lenses. One is through the Islamic lens, and one is through it's really like the progressive lens, right? Very different.
Right. So I'm hearing echoes of critical theory all over this.
Right. So how does that go together, right? How is it that the queers for Palestine are for Palestine? Like they wouldn't be welcome in Gaza; they'd be hanging by their neck,
Right.
And it actually has to do with what you might call the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? So as early as I'll start with Islam. In the Quran, there's a very famous verse in which Muhammad tells his followers, don't make friends with Jews and Christians because they're friends of each other and they're working together, conspiring together against you. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what it says. It's quoted frequently. And it's been a theme all through Islamic history, right? Jews and Christians, and they're infidels. They're all infidels. They work together, conspire together against the one God, Allah. And for that reason, when Osama bin Laden, the guy behind those 9/11 attacks, published his rulings, his messages to the world, he would talk about the Jews and Christians, or Jews and Crusaders and Zionists, right? They're part of a piece. In the Islamic imagination, now, again, I'll say the obvious thing. It doesn't mean every Muslim thinks this way.
Sure.
But kind of baked into that worldview, the Quranic worldview, there is an understanding that Jews and Christians, they once had some truth, they corrupted it over the years, and they are stubborn, don't want to convert to the one true and final religion, and so work together to undermine the real believers. So already, before the establishment of Israel, there is this theme within Islam of a link between the Jews and the Christians, right? Of what became, the Crusaders and what became the Zionists, right? It's the same thing. And now, of course, it doesn't help that historically, again, the British were helpful to the Zionists. So to them, that's it. That's the evidence that they need.
Yeah.
Now, from the other side of it, I think that progressives disagree with Islamists on virtually everything except one thing, which is that the current world order, the international order, which is more or less run by Europe and America, needs to be dismantled. Right? Most of them are also, coincidentally, not fans of Judeo-Christian morality. Mm-hmm. Right? And so all of the, Israel becomes a proxy for Western imperialism, for Judeo-Christian triumphalism, the occupation of the human mind, right? You read Nietzsche and, Nietzsche's worldview. Nietzsche hated Christianity. He hated the weak, the slave morality, mm-hmm. as he called it, right? That was like shoved into Europe, this noble and amazing and magnificent civilization that conquered lands, and the blonde beast, the barbarian, got like emasculated and weakened by this feminine religion out of Judea, right? He can't stand the Christian church, but where does he trace it back to? He traces it back to the Jews, right? And Nietzsche ultimately paved the way for Adolf Hitler, who was a fan, because he realized that the problem in Europe or in the West isn't just our, failing institutions and all of these things. It's actually much deeper. It's actually our hearts, our minds have been occupied by these despicable, this alien race, these Jews who brought all this stuff into Europe. So the progressives, who are more or less embodying that kind of worldview, arrive at the same conclusion that the Islamists arrive at, which is that this Anglo-American order, all, chock full of all this Christian Bible Jewish stuff, needs to be dismantled, and we need to be the ones that do it, which is the same position that radical Muslims are in. So they kind of look on the picket line, so to speak. They look down the line. They're like, oh, you guys are for that. Okay, so let's work together. Strange bedfellows. Yeah. But they find each other because of the worldview.
Give us a brief summary of what happened on October 7th, and then where are we today? It's October 30th right now.
On October 7th. So what's interesting about October 7th, it's never talked about very much in Western media, is that it was a big Jewish holiday. First of all, it was the Sabbath. So it's the day of the week where, even in Israel, where you find a lot of secular Jews, people are off. It's the weekend. Mm-hmm. 70% of Israel, including secular people, observe the Sabbath in one way or the other, right? They'll bring everybody over on Friday night. They'll have the meals. Sometimes they'll do the candles, but they all observe it. So Saturday morning, 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, Israel's quiet. But it was also a big holiday. It was the last day of almost like the Christmas season in Judaism, right? The high holidays. Yeah. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. And this day in particular is called Simchat Torah, which is the joy of the Torah. And literally, Jews in synagogues all over the world take the scrolls. Every synagogue has the books of Moses in a scroll, and they dance with it, right? It's a celebration of the Bible. It's literally a celebration of the Bible. That's the day that this massacre happened on. And several hundred, the number's still unclear, 300, 400, 500. I've seen numbers as upward of 2,000 Palestinian terrorists, early in the morning that Saturday, broke through the fence, came over the fence with paragliders, took boats around the fence on the sea route, and invaded Israel. And they didn't invade Israeli military bases. They invaded Israeli towns and cities, and went from house to house in those cities for hours, butchering, torturing, raping innocent Israeli civilians, more than 1,400. 1,400 people, and not the men, certainly not only, women and children, and not even big children, like infants. There's a report of a guy, this was just yesterday, who's now come out. He was one of the ones on the Israeli side that went after the carnage to try to clean it up. They found a baby in an oven. I don't even want to say more about it. There's more to that story, but I mean, that's the level of sadism that these Palestinian terrorists affiliated with Hamas, an Islamic terror group, committed against these people. I mean, just story after story. And the worst part about it is they filmed it. They filmed all of it. They filmed it on their phones. They filmed it on the phones of the people they killed. And they put it up on social media, on Telegram. They put it up on the Facebook pages of the people they killed. Like, they uploaded the video of them killing the person whose Facebook page they posted it to. I mean, just sick. And that happened. There's a whole story here about the failure of the Israeli security establishment to forecast this, to be ready for it, to respond to it. There were places in southern Israel where it took hours and hours and hours for help to arrive. A lot of people died. One of the people who speaks, we mentioned Passages. Yeah. One of the guys who speaks to a lot of our groups, Amit Waks, tried to fight back. Him and a couple other guys from his village, and killed. Horrible stuff. I can't even recount for you this stuff. I've like now said I don't want to see anymore. I don't want to hear anymore. Yeah. It's too much. I'm like, my brain is full. And it was a shock. It was a total and complete shock to Israel. Israel's a very strong country. They have to be. Yeah. State-of-the-art military, state-of-the-art technology, sensors, drones, right? Everything you can imagine. And it all crumbled right in front of their eyes and in the most horrific way possible. There is a tremendous amount of soul-searching happening in Israel right now. The people processing. It's a psychological shock as much as it is a military shock. Yeah. And right now, the situation is as follows. There are, on last count, I've seen it was like 240 Israeli and non-Israeli hostages that were taken that day and brought back to Gaza. They're in there somewhere. This hornet's nest, this little area called the Gaza Strip, Palestinian area. We could talk more about Gaza if you like. They're in there somewhere. The Israeli military is committed to finding them, liberating them, and to destroying Hamas, or at least destroying its capability to rule in Gaza. Hamas has been ruling there since 2007. It's an Islamic state. It's a little itty-bitty Islamic state, barricaded by Israel, by Egypt. Nobody there is happy. And Israel's finally decided this is not a threat that can kind of be contained and managed, which was the theory before. This is a threat that has to be eradicated. And so there's a war, as a ground war, as we're sitting here talking. Israeli soldiers, Jews, but also Christians and Muslims in this Israeli army, by the way, and I know a number of them, who are fighting for the security of Israel, for the safety of these hostages, and indirectly, weirdly, although no one's going to tell you this, they're fighting for the well-being of the Palestinians who live there, who don't want to be ruled by Hamas. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So this is not, we've seen conflicts every couple years, some rockets get thrown, Israel responds. This is a qualitatively different situation.
Yeah, so right? since Israel was a nation in 1946, right? It was 48 was their official nationhood. And the Muslim countries around them came against them immediately. And in God's providence, they stood. And this tiny little nation grew and grew. And it was fascinating attacks. How is this one? You just said this was kind of unprecedented. How is this unprecedented from what's happened before?
Well, it's the single most Jewish deaths since the Holocaust on a single day. Right off the bat, right there, despite all the wars between Israel and its Arab neighbors, just in terms of raw numbers, how many killed in a day, it beats them all by a lot. It's also notable for the level of depravity, right? Israel has had wars with Egypt, wars with Jordan, but this kind of
military
style, it was like tank shoots tank, the stuff you would expect. The beheadings, the rapes, the stories, this is very unusual. Like, it's ISIS. I mean, it's ISIS. I don't even think ISIS did some of this stuff. I mean, it is depraved. That's is like another.
Yeah, that's kind of boggled my mind too, because on the one hand, I'm thinking, what kind of support do they think they're going to engender by videoing these things and publishing them and making it known? And yet, at the same time, I hear people who have access to see the truth argue that it's somehow justified, or that it's not true, it's made up, it's all AI generated stuff, or
right.
And it's kind of confusing, because you would think anybody with any sensibility at all would recognize wickedness and evil when they see it. And yet, I think this goes to show the power of a worldview, because it's something we talk about worldviews being a pattern of ideas, or even like lenses that help you see the world. And if they're the right prescription based on true beliefs of reality in the world, then you see more clearly. But if they're not, if they're false beliefs, then they actually can blind you to reality, the reality that's right in front of your face. And can you speak to that a little bit, of how these ideas, what causes a person, and granted, not everyone, and I'm sure there are Muslims that are appalled by this as well, but what causes a people, by and large, to rally behind a group of people who do this? Hamas, a group of terrorists who would do this to another people.
I still find a hard time wrapping my own head around it. I think that Israel, as a country, just as the Jew, as an individual in previous eras, has become the arch villain and scapegoat of the world. In Europe, what was anti-Semitism really about? How did it manifest? Often it manifested as people projecting onto the Jew all of their collective problems, economic problems, political problems. It's the Jews' fault, right? If you're a capitalist, the Jews are communist. If you're communist, the Jews are capitalist, right? They're too rich, they're too poor, they're too religious, not religious enough, right? The Jew is a blank canvas, right? And I think that the aggrieved peoples of the world have done the same thing with Israel, right? It's the Jew of the countries. And in that way, Jews themselves, Israeli Jews, have been dehumanized. I mean, add to that the fact that Hamas, and you could find this all over the internet, videos of little kids saying these things. Hamas has taught, and not just Hamas, like many, let's say, Islamically influenced school curriculums have taught for years their students that Jews are, based on a hadith, a tradition of Islam, Jews are descendants of apes and pigs. Like, they're not actually even human, really human. And so you habituate millions of people for decades to dehumanize the Jewish people, to scapegoat and villainize this thing called Israel. And you've created conditions under which it becomes justified to do anything you have to do to, lead the resistance, to decolonize, right? To self-liberate. And I think that's how you get there, right? It's okay to kill a Jew. I mean, we could all agree that Jews are like the problem behind all the problems, right? A lot of people would nod and say yes to that.
Yeah, so it's very similar to what led to the Holocaust itself. I mean, it's not just a Nazi idea. The idea is broader than Nazism.
Anti-Semitism is often lumped together with a lot of hatreds. Oh, okay, hatred of blacks, that's in America racism, or hatred of Jews is not really all that this is about. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory, right? There is almost always in an anti-Semitic statement the allegation that there is a much bigger story, right? And that the Jews are behind that story, and they're orchestrating all of our politics, orchestrating the Iraq War and 9/11, right? They did 9/11 and all these. They're behind everything, and for that reason, they are the enemy of all mankind. I mean, it gets cosmic. People, and I personally, and I know you'll understand this, as will your audience, there's something spiritual about it.
Yeah.
There's something. How do you get there? How is it that hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in Syria in the last 10 years? This is an issue I've worked on. Tried advocating for that issue. You can't get anybody to sit up and pay attention. But, the Jews, you introduce one Jew into that story, international news, for years, right? You see 100,000 person marches in London in support of Hamas. After Hamas attacks the Jews, if you saw these things, you would think, oh, the Jews did something. What'd they do? No, all they did was get attacked. by surprise. So how do you explain it? I think rationally you can explain it. How do you maintain a hatred and a desire to exterminate a single people for centuries in different times and places, different people groups, different situations? There's no rational explanation. There is something special about the Jews. And some people think there's something deeply unspecial about them, but they go together. Everybody understands this is not a normal group of people.
Yeah.
Some people take it in a good direction, the biblical myth, and then some people take the anti-myth, which is anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Wow, that's clarifying. Because as Christians, even though as Western Christians, many of us, I think, live like practical naturalists, we would honor the word and say we believe it to be true, but we really live our daily lives by what we see, touch, taste, and feel, and don't practically, probably other than prayer, think in terms of the supernatural. But you start to see this kind of thing, you have to come to terms with the fact that there's something supernatural going on here.
For me, you asked me, like, how did I come to Christ? It was actually by studying Jewish history. It's such an unlikely story that this little group of people pops onto history's, table and says, we're special. God told us we are. And he said we're going to last forever. And we believe him. And then proceed to live it out, right? Even though everybody tries to kill this group of people. I'm like, and I love history, so I've always been a big history nut.
Yeah.
And this was such an anomaly, such an outlier, that I'm like, what's behind this? Like, how? And that was the thing that ultimately led me to embrace Christianity. Weirdly enough, it was stuff like this.
That's awesome. So, who is Hamas? I mean, where did they come from?
Hamas. So Hamas is an acronym, actually. If it was in English, it'd be like HMS. Hamas is the Islamic Resistance Movement. It is a spin-off of something called the Muslim Brotherhood, which was started in Egypt in the 20th century. And like the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas believes that the real solution to our problems, their problems, is starts with a spiritual revival. It's actually not unlike what a lot of us talk about in Christianity, right?
Yeah.
You want to fix our problems. Our problems are not primarily political. They start in the heart.
Yeah.
We need to reform ourselves, our communities, and work our way up and build an authentically, pious Islamic society. That's what the Muslim Brotherhood believes. With that comes something we don't have in Christianity, which is an embrace of jihad, right? Of this idea that not only every state, every king, every country needs to wage war on behalf of the true religion, but individual Muslims, right? And this was an innovation. This was not something that was so common in Islam before that. But all of these things are the things that inspired people like Osama bin Laden, inspired ISIS. They took it all. They all have a slightly different flavor. But Hamas is very much in the mix. Iran, which is a Shiite country, right? There's some differences within Islam between the Sunni stream, the majority, and the Shiite stream. They hate each other, by the way. But Iran also absorbed some of these same ideas, and it's why it's called the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is why also Iran supports Hamas. Hamas is primarily Sunni. They are Shiite, but they have common cause in their religion, at least at a high level, and in their opposition to Israel and to Zionism. So Hamas started in the late 80s as a response to the secular nationalists, if we can call them that, who were then ruling the Palestinian movement. They were all Muslims, or most of them, but their language, their theories, their strategies were primarily secular in nature. Right? They talked about politics and war. Hamas comes on the scene and says, it's deeper than that. It's about religion. We need to liberate Palestine. Okay, yeah, for Palestinians, but really, we're liberating it for God. And this land is consecrated land. This land is holy land. We need to return it back to the God who gave it. They also introduced into the Palestinian context, famously, suicide bombings, right? And they did this a lot in the 90s, early 2000s. And they were the ones understood to be responsible for stalling the peace process. Back before probably most of your listeners were alive in the early 90s, There was a possibility. There was a moment where people thought Israel was going to make peace with the Palestinians. There was going to be some kind of Palestinian state, and two peoples side by side living together in some kind of harmony. Well, Hamas was one of the main groups that frustrated all that by blowing themselves up at Israeli pizza shops and malls and theaters and things, forcing Israelis to take more security measures, which made the whole peace process more difficult. And they've been ruling in Gaza. So there's two Palestinian territories. There's the West Bank, a much bigger piece of land that's, Jews call it Judea and Samaria. It's kind of the heartland of the Bible. Palestinians rule that. But there's another little piece of land called the Gaza Strip. Now, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip from its Palestinian rivals, actually threw a bunch of them off a roof, killed a couple hundred of their own people.
Was that before the 2007 election or after?
Well, the election was in 2006.
Oh, 2006.
They won.
Yeah.
You're right to point that out. And then they took over physically, militarily in 2007. The Battle of Gaza, summer 2007. And
when they've
been ruling ever since.
They just pushed out all their rival Palestinian leaders.
So that was like an intra-Palestinian war.
How did they win the election? Did they have the people that persuaded? I mean, did the Palestinian people really, or was there kind of this, you vote for us or else?
No, it wasn't. You vote for us or else. And in fact, they were the weaker party.
Really,
the United States was so confident that Hamas could never ever win that it was us, in fact, who pushed elections on them, and inadvertently ended up legitimating them because the people went out voluntarily and vote for them. I think their final numbers were 46% or something. Fatah Party, their big rival, the secular nationalist party, they got 41. So they didn't get the majority, but they got a plurality. They got enough to win.
Okay.
And look, if you look at the numbers today, they're supported more than ever. So why did they come to power? I think part of it is, they told a story to the voters. They said, listen, you've been led by these secular nationalists, and where has it gotten you, right? The Israelis are still as powerful as ever. The Americans, the Europeans, still providing cover for this state more than ever. You're nowhere. You're actually worse off than you've ever been. It's because you're neglecting God. You need to bring God into this. And we're strong, we're tough, we're uncompromising. We reject all this nonsense peace with Israel. We're not doing that. We are going to stay true to our principles. And they spoke in the kind of religious, pious, moral language that got people out, and so they won.
And they're still supported by Palestinian people in the polls, and it's only going up. How does that work with the conditions the Palestinians are living in? All the money that's come in through Hamas's control, and they've not put it to use to make better the lives for the people there.
It's a great question. Part of it is the other leadership has been so much of a failure in Palestinian eyes. It's so corrupt, right? The people who rule the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, it's like a Palestinian government. A lot of people don't know there's an actual Palestinian state. Yeah. It's called the Palestinian Authority. Yeah. It has a president, has diplomats, has post offices. It's like a proper state or quasi-state. They're terrible. Any poll you look at, and I look at a lot of these polls, the president is the most hated person in the survey, right? It's 80-something% want him to go away. For years now, this guy, and there's been no elections, by the way, since that one in 2006. People are frustrated. That's the short answer to your question. People are frustrated. They see no progress being made. Their streets are still full of potholes. There's no, the hospitals are terrible. They can't move. They can't do anything. And so they start to tell themselves, you know what? This whole negotiation thing, for what? It doesn't get us anywhere. The answer is armed struggle. We got to go back to our roots. And so I'll tell you what, September 13th was the last big survey in the West Bank and Gaza by the main Palestinian polling firm. And there was a question on the survey. Do you support armed attacks, violence against Israeli civilians inside Israel? And the number of people who said yes was 67%. And this is a survey that's not done on the phone. This is people go house to house. This is like an old-fashioned survey. Very credible, the most credible survey organization in the West Bank. And 67%, so like 2 out of the 3 people you'll pull off the street thinks it's okay to go do what Hamas did on October 7th, right? That's where the people are at these days. And the longer that I've done this work, the more radicalized they are becoming, right? There was on that same survey a question: if there was a vote today between the current president, like I said, who everybody hates, and Ismail Haniyeh, who's one of the Hamas leaders, who would you vote for? It's not even close, Ismail Haniyeh. They'd vote for the Hamas guy over the secular national guy because they think he's weak, they think he's corrupt, they think he's in bed with the Israelis, and they want somebody to stick it to their enemies. Hamas is the only one that says and shows that they can do it.
Even though Hamas uses them as shields, even though Hamas, operates out of their homes and their hospitals and all of that, they're willing to tolerate that.
So it's important to point out that on all of these surveys, there's at the low end a quarter, an upper end like a third, sometimes even a little bit more, of Palestinians who would basically vote on these surveys the way you and I might, right? They're for negotiation, they're for a two-state solution. Yeah. Like they're saying the right things. It's like a third. I always call them like the silent third, and they do not. I mean, they would sit here and probably nod as you're speaking, like, yeah, they're horrible. They're not good governors. But they have been so conditioned. The Palestinian people have been so conditioned through their schools, through their media. I mean, talk about worldview, to understand themselves as the victim, right? To understand the Israelis as the victimizer, to understand that the only real solution is an eradication of Israel and the establishment of a Palestinian state on top of it, and filled with this idea that by all means necessary, like we will get the occupier, we will get the Zionist enemy, that they are now, especially in like a moment of peak frustration, willing to tolerate whatever they have to see these goals get accomplished. And there's a certain kind of mob mentality too.
Yeah.
People just get whipped up in a frenzy, and they get behind things that, on their own they probably wouldn't get behind.
Right. College, you called it the group stupid factor, but nationally it can be really horrible. So I mean, it goes to point out the reality that the narratives we believe about our lives and the world we live in really make all the difference.
I love that you guys focus on that. I think it's brilliant to focus on worldview, because if you get the worldview right, all the other stuff falls into place.
Wow.
And you see how it can go well and how it could go really, really poorly.
Yeah. I mean, imagine since 1948 when they became a nation, one of the things we've seemed to have, correct me if I'm wrong, but my looking back at the history since then, it seems like the world powers have been unable to recognize this religious fervor and worldview prohibition for there to be a two-state solution. You'd have to be a pretty secular Muslim to go for that, and there's just not a lot of secular Muslims in power there right now.
It's even, I mean, the concept is foreign to that part of the world, even if you're, like, it's not like here, you're religious, you're not religious, pretty black and white.
Yeah.
93% of Palestinians on these surveys say that they're religious. And they'll say like a lot, a little, but it's like, it's hot, medium, mild. It's not, not.
Right.
So they may not pray 5 times a day. They may actually be, crappy Muslims, but they believe in that worldview, and they couldn't imagine entertaining anything else or saying, I'm not a Muslim. Now, what you point out though is extremely important, and I have no doubt that anybody listening to this will understand why religion, why spirituality, why worldview makes a difference. And I would hope that there are out there in your audience people who want to go into public service or go into careers that somehow relate to this, because this is, and honestly, this is what Philos is about, right? Is introducing the hidden dimension, right? The thing that nobody's talking about. I have this podcast called The Deep Map, and anybody who's interested can check it out. And my tagline is exploring the hidden religious and cultural dynamics driving headlines around the world. Because people do things, shockingly, largely because of what they believe to be true about the world. And if you don't get that one thing going into this region, you won't understand anything. You'll think it's about borders and, who gets to control this piece of land and how many refugees get to come. Those are all issues, but they're secondary issues. The primary issues are psychological. They're mythical, right? They're spiritual. And Westerners have a hard time, Americans more than anyone, in grasping that fact. They think it's, we'll give them more jobs, more economic programming, more social development. It's like, no.
Yeah.
It's much deeper than that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we're running close on time, and I want to honor the time you're giving us. What are some practical ways that American Christians can engage with this? I mean, so the bulk of our audience have been trained to think in terms of worldview. Many of the younger ones are in college or grad school or young professionals. If they're talking with a classmate or professor, or in that context, it's probably more hostile, but maybe a neighbor or a friend who is buying a false narrative, just doesn't know any better, or hasn't done the diligence to seek to find the truth. How would you instruct them? How would you encourage them to speak the truth in love? And then are there other things they can do other than, of course, as believers, pray for Israel and for the Palestinians that don't desire?
Yeah, for sure that. So I sometimes teach Christian response to conflict. So compassion, diligence, discernment, action. That's usually the litany I roll out. So compassion, and this helps a lot when you're talking to people. You should be genuinely a compassionate person who, putting aside ideology, politics, all of that, can recognize the humanity in everyone, right? And I think there are Christians in this space who, could care less what a Palestinian is or what their life is like or what happens to them in the future. I can get that because there's a lot of bad that's been done from that side to the other. But I told you, there is at least a third based on public opinion surveys who are not really into it and don't want to be part of it. They want a normal life. So showing compassion, voicing compassion in a conversation with people, helping them understand that you're not somebody who, just wants to destroy everybody who disagrees with you or with Israel or whomever. That actually goes a long way, I've found. And sometimes people are kind of taken aback, like, wow, okay, I didn't think you would
One of
care.
our students who actually went on one of the Passages trips to Israel this past June was telling me at his university there's a free speech corner where they've got white billboards up, and it's a conjunction of 3 main spaces on campus. And so when all the students come up there, and somebody will write a word or an idea or something, and then you get these responses, and then people kind of mill around having conversation about it. So he took up a pen shortly after October 7th and wrote in big red letters, "Can you be pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli?" Just to start the conversation of, is there a category for loving people and having compassion and being for the well-being of both when it's so polarized, right?
That's a great,
but something similar to that, right? And genuinely loving people.
So, yeah. Genuinely, right. I think I'm pretty sure we're called to do that.
It's in there somewhere.
Now, the mistake, right, somewhere, the mistake that people make is stopping there. And this is what I always tell Christians. Christians are actually quite good at having compassion for the most part. But oftentimes people use it as an excuse to be like, oh, I don't know, like both sides, like it's all fine.
The relativism
it's not all
creeps
fine,
out.
Right? And like, who wants to be that guy on, Instagram being like pro-Israel? That's not cool. Like nobody wants to be that guy. So I think that plays a role too. So I would say the next step is very important. Diligence. Like you gotta actually, if this is at all something that you feel like you should talk about, then it's something you got to learn about. Now, you don't have to get a PhD. It's not like this impossible task. But you got to know the gist of it, right? And be able to articulate more or less where things stand. Now, as a Christian, you have sort of 2 dimensions you're working. One is like the stuff we talked about earlier, the history. Like you have to know basically kind of what happened. But there's also the spiritual dimension, right? And what role does Israel play in the Christian imagination, the Christian story? That's also important. So one resource I really highly recommend to people is a movie that we made at Philos called Hope in the Holy Land. It's on Amazon Prime. It's on YouTube. It's pretty much everywhere. We're actually trying to show this film now specifically. So if there are people in your audience who are interested in showing the film and doing like Q&As and stuff like that, we can make that happen. It's a great story. It profiles a guy who starts out being like, I'm pro-Israel, but what about Palestinians? I keep hearing about these Palestinians. What's the deal with them? Is there a possibility for peace between these people? And he goes on this whole journey. It's really amazing, like street level type stuff that he does. And surprisingly, given the subject matter, the film ends exposing the humanity of both sides and a hopeful path forward. It's a great film. Like in an hour and a half, you'll learn more than probably, a college course. And it's Christian. These are all Christians. So Hope in the Holy Land, I would highly recommend that. We also at Philos have these things that it's called Pathfinder courses. They're free. They're audio courses, and they're on everything from the conflict to Islam 101, Jewish Christian relations, like all this stuff, Syrian civil war. Like we have all these courses, and it's like super deep dive. That's if you really want to get into the nitty gritty. Discernment is the next part. So I urge everybody to go out and read as much as you can. Read on both sides, but there's a certain point at which you got to stop learning and start discerning. And I think that being informed by the Holy Spirit, it's important for us to parse some of these things and come to some conclusions. It can't just be, well, they're both right. And be able to articulate your position after that process, and then action. So the one thing I'll recommend, I'll stop here, is we have something at Philos, another thing called the Philos Action League. And the Philos Action League, besides its really cool name, is this really cool network of volunteers all over the country. We have like 3,000, every state, in some countries as well, outside of the U.S., Christian volunteers who agree to be like local representatives of friendship to the Jewish community. Now, you'd be surprised at where the Jewish community can be found. Everybody thinks about New York and LA and Chicago. Jews are everywhere. And now more than ever, they feel alone. They feel abandoned. They're seeing these marches on American streets, American campuses, and they're thinking, oh my goodness, like, do we even have a place here? So what PAL does, Philos Action League does, is we show up physically. We have this thing we do where we bring bouquets of white roses to Jewish synagogues, community centers, schools, little handwritten note that's just, hey, I'm Robert. I'm a Christian. I'm in your neighborhood. You don't know me, but I just want to let you know you're not alone. I'm your friend, and I would love to continue the conversation. And we just did something last Thursday. We did 179 cities on the same day.
Oh, cool.
And we have thank you notes, like it'd tear you up. I mean, you'd be shocked at how a little gesture like that can go a long way. And not only just like helping Jews feel more comfortable in America, it's rectifying the poor Christian witness of our forebears, right? Things have been done in the name of the cross to this people that are unspeakable. You show up with a bouquet of flowers, you are chipping away at that awful legacy one little bit at a time. So Philos Action League, it's super fun. It feels good. It's just a great thing to be part of. And it's very simple. Like, you don't have to have a PhD in the conflict to show up and be like, hey, I'm Joe. Would love to get to know you. So really urge people to do that. It's a simple way to actually make a difference.
Yeah, we've all got the opportunity, especially any students who are on campus. I have that image of that girl in mind who is pleading with her, college administrator, please stop this protest, stop these chants, stop these threats against me and my people on campus. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Robert, thank you. Thank you so much for carving out some time. I'd love to maybe continue some of these conversations, and hopefully this will just be the beginning. But thank you so much for giving your time to us.
Well, I appreciate you guys highlighting this issue and having me on.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
Thank you.